Hello.
Hi. Welcome to our podcast, SLTea Time.
SLTea Time.
SLT Time. We are a group of speech and language therapists
and students from Black and diverse ethnic backgrounds.
The aim of this platform is to create space and discussion around race, ethnicity, and lived experiences of speech and language therapists in the workplace and in university.
Hi, so welcome to SLTea Time in a collab episode with the UK SLT Time Network. So today we're just going to be chatting about intersectionality within speech and language therapy, mainly focusing on between people of colour and the LGBT community, but we want it to be quite a broad discussion, making sure we chat about all different intersections. And we've got quite an exciting chat today with members from both networks and outside the network as well. So I'm Rick. I'm a new member of the SLTea Time Network, and I'm also part of the committee for the UK SLT Pride Network. I'm a student at Manchester Met University, and hopefully be finished soon. Enjoying it so far. So we've got Jen here. Jen, if you wanted to introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Jen. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a speech and language therapist working in the hospital in South East London. I'm also part of the committee for the UK SLT Pride Network. Same as Rick, I'm one of the communications officers. Really excited to be here.
We've got Anne as well.
Hi, my name's Anne. I'm a speech and language therapist. I'm working in community in East London. My pronouns are they, them, and I would say maybe I'm a veteran for SLTea Time. Well, Ilya started it, and I was there when she did it. It's amazing. And I'm also on the email mailing list of UK SLT Pride as of, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So here I am.
Exciting. We're glad to have you. So we've got Simon as well joining us.
Hi everyone. So my name's Simon, pronouns he, him. Speech language therapist. I've been a speech language therapist for the last 11, 12, maybe 13 years. And currently I work in East London and Bedfordshire. I'm currently not working as a speech language therapist. I'm still working within learning disability services, but doing something slightly different.
Amazing. Thank you, Simon. And we've got Kate just joining us as well.
Hi, I'm Kate, and my pronouns are they, them. I'm a trans non-binary queer speech therapist. I work with adults in acute setting in London, and I'm the chair of the UK SLT Pride committee network. So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. And my pronouns are he, him, which I forgot to mention, but thank you so much, everyone, for including that. It's a really important kind of thing to do when we're introducing ourselves, to kind of give support to everyone in our community, and create that awareness as well. So I just want to kick it off with any general discussions about experiences around intersectionality within speech and language therapy. I know when I walk into a clinic or walk into a room, my race comes before my sexuality does, because that's something that's a lot more visible, and that's something that people do judge first straight away. So it's something that I like. Sexuality is something I can maybe hide, but race isn't. So it's very different kind of few aspects there. Does anyone else have any kind of thoughts about that?
I would definitely say same. Like, it's interesting, like working in East London, like when I'm with patients and stuff, I would definitely say maybe my sexuality, or like the way I'm perceived, like to the way I look, is kind of more thought about at first than my race. But then maybe when I'm at work, that is definitely more my race than anything else. It's very weird, kind of, as a speech and language therapist, which maybe isn't like, it's so interesting being in a like group with you guys now, because I'm like, oh my god, this is so diverse. I can't believe we're all speech therapists. This is mad. But like, I don't know, sometimes when I am at work and they're like sitting in meetings and stuff, I'm like, it's not always the most diverse. And then I'm like, oh, I'm the only black one. And then I'm like running a group of like patients in the borough that I work in, and I'm like, like we're all black, but I don't think that there's not any queer people, if that makes sense. So it's interesting at different points where like that parts of your identity are kind of like taken, where you like kind of your point, sorry, there are like different points like within my day, like within my career, that are like parts of my identity kind of to the forefront, which is always like really interesting to navigate.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, there's our different parts of identity aren't separate really, and some people do assume that, you know, your sexuality, your race, your gender, your abilities are all very distinct, but they're not, you know. So I think that's really key to keep in mind. Kate, what did you think about this? Yeah.
I think it was really poignant what you said about kind of throughout the day, different parts of your identity are at the forefront, and I think lots of maybe our colleagues can feel similar, maybe kind of you know, where we're a female dominated field, and so therefore, you know, maybe some of our female speech therapists are thinking, gosh, it's really always women, and how that impacts on when you're discussing with maybe male colleagues, male doctors. But actually, it's like, for me, how much of a lot of our colleagues have to come to work and think about how their identity impacts on their job, and like what they look like, how they come across, their sexuality actually impacts their job, or can they just do their job and not have to have that on their shoulder, on their, you know, on the weight of just trying to learn this complex kind of field that we work in, and just how exhausting that can be, in my opinion.
Sure, Kate. Thanks so much for sharing that. Simon, what were your thoughts?
Thank you. I think just really to echo what has already been said, as you all were talking, I was kind of nodding and identifying with a lot of that. I think so. I started my training in 2006, qualified in 2009, and I often talk about feeling like although in the grand scheme of things that's not a huge amount of time, I certainly feel the shift within myself, but sort of more collectively in speech language therapy. I feel like there's more of a shift where intersectionality, I guess, is more considered, more discussed now. And for me personally, when I walked into that room in UCE, as it was at the time, and that first lecture theatre, the thing that I noticed for myself at that point was being black and being male. And it was a long, you know, it was a really long time before I met or saw or spoke to any other SLTs who looked like me. And then I didn't come out until I consider it to be much later. So and I suppose it is in terms of my speech language therapy career. So I guess, although I've always known that of being queer, but I guess, you know, that the way, like my perception of myself and how I feel about myself and kind of coming to work, that's all, you know, the conversations that we have in the workplace and sort of my thoughts about who I am, that has shifted. So I guess how I feel that maybe people perceive me in the workplace has also shifted as well. But certainly being male, that you know, that was something that I, you know, was always very apparent in a very kind of women-led, white woman-led kind of profession. And there certainly have been times, and I've spoken about it more recently, where I felt that I've had to kind of alter myself, alter the way that I interact, alter the way that I communicate, maybe how passionate I am about some particular points, or if I'm talking about a particular area. I feel like I've had to tailor that and change that. But I would certainly say in terms of my queer identity, which I guess is kind of been strengthened much later, that's also been really apparent as well, and kind of how I present it in the workspace and how I present with service users and patients as well. And the word that just came up in my mind was appropriateness of conversation as well, because sometimes I guess in a kind of a cis heterosexual kind of sphere, you know, people might talk with their patients about what they did at the weekend with their partner and things like that. But I guess in my queer identity, there's not that I necessarily truly believe this to be the case, but there's been times where I've thought, is that appropriate? Should I reveal that part of myself? And I'm not sure that other people necessarily have to do that day to day in the way that I maybe would police myself in terms of what I share. And I think some of that is because of my queer identity.
Yeah, I really echo what you said, Simon. I think, walking into a room, and feeling like you don't look like anyone else, you feel like you're the one sort of standing out. I think it's like a survival instinct to sort of like act a bit more like the rest of the group of people, and changing our language and sort of talking about the same things, and that kind of things. And I think there's a lot of, what's the word? It's like your identity is being buried, in the sense. I guess this is good that recently there's more conversations about diversity, more conversation about being more inclusive. But sort of day-to-day interaction, you still hear a lot of those, for example, stereotypical thoughts on different communities and that sort of thing. So I think it's really hard for someone with, myself as a person of color, someone who's queer, to start these conversations as well, because it's like it's hard, like it's not always safe to start this conversation. But another thing is, even if we do, it's almost like then now every time we talk about diversity, every time we talk about diversity, we're going to come to you like suddenly the expert of all of this inclusion stuff, which is very, very tiring. So I guess that's something that definitely happens. And I'm sure, judging from all of your action, I'm not the only one who feels that in this profession.
Oh yeah, I mean, the other day someone was asking me all about Pride because they assumed I was the expert, like on Manchester Pride, and I've never been. But they were just like, "You're gay, you must know about Pride. Let me ask you all the questions." I'd like to know that as well. But no, I definitely agree. I was listening to an old episode of SLTea Time, and someone mentioned about has this big focus on gender, kind of promoting gender kind of diversity within SLT, but that focus is often just on providing more spotlight for men to be in a profession. I do think that kind of focusing on trans and non-binary people as well, and how we can help support people within the profession who aren't just in this binary spectrum of kind of cis male and cis female, really important. Gender diversity within speech language therapy shouldn't just include or support the binary. So I think that's something that the whole profession can really do to a little bit further.
I agree.
Yeah.
Just talked over you. No, but I agree, because I think we're missing like a whole group of people in healthcare in terms of like who we represent as well. And if you think about the approaches, I remember reading this thing. This is when I worked in peds, but if you had a patient that was trans, then their whole previous, like all their records get deleted and you can't have access to them when they've kind of started their new identity, which is like, I think it's quite problematic to kind of, because you're kind of erasing who that person was before. And I guess the people that make these kind of policies, they don't have that experience at all. They probably just see it as like, oh yeah, let's delete it and move on, and like whatever happened before doesn't affect them, when like that's not a thing. And like you need more people in speech therapy, in healthcare in general, that are from across the gender spectrum and sexuality wise as well, and race, and just in general there is a real issue. But I think it is speech therapy, it's a bit more intense, I think, in that like it is a lot of white women, but in healthcare in general, in healthcare leadership, there's a real lack of any kind of diversity when it comes to anything, really.
I thought it would be a good time to add some of our experiences from the we asked some of our colleagues and anonymous form on Twitter, and we did ask if there was any experiences that you would like to share around your identity and intersectionality. And I think your point then about kind of needing people in high places that represent who we are to actually get policy and to get, you know, things change. We have someone that said even as a senior lecturer, they get comments about toning down about being gay. They've had comments about pictures from Pride being unprofessional. And unfortunately, we have someone that has been in this profession for 35 years and has continued to be very, very troubled by the ongoing challenges faced by speech therapists who are people of colour, people of different sexual orientation, and people transitioning. So they feel that even people in academia, people in specifically people coming from conservative non-metropolitan areas of the country are a barrier to students on placement. And yeah, they feel that even with the kind of focus in developments of Black Lives Matter and the UK political climate and Brexit, these attitudes haven't necessarily changed. So they actually no longer work in this field, and they feel like a lot of the work that we do in this field is tokenistic, which I think is very poignant.
Sharing that's it's really great to hear from our members and people within our profession, because I guess we're only a small snapshot of everyone who's within the community. What were your thoughts on that, Simon?
I mean, I guess you know, as you were reading that, Kate, I was nodding, because what was said, and it doesn't necessarily surprise me. What I will say is I've been reflecting quite a lot, and I think it's since I've taken maybe a sideward step out of speech language therapy, and thinking about, you know, what changes need to occur within the profession, who will it benefit, how will people benefit from those changes. And one of the things that I think is often talked about is kind of increased representation. We need to see a more diverse workforce and population, a workforce rather, and you know, largely I agree with that, but it's something that the person that had said, who's in maybe senior leadership or the senior lecturer, and which I kind of always kind of come back to, is thinking about kind of that representation without support for those individuals or for those people that are within the system. For me, it feels quite meaningless, because you could just get, you could have a varied spectrum of different people from different walks of life. But then if we're not kind of looking at the root cause and thinking about how those people, once they're in those positions, how are they supported, and, saying that, to kind of tone down and things like that, my thoughts are that it can become a very lonely place for those individuals. And it can feel, and I know I felt it in the past, and I think maybe what was said a little bit earlier on, where there's sometimes maybe that expectation that that individual who maybe represents different, they may be queer, they may be non-binary, but sometimes it certainly felt in the past that you're because of that identity, you almost need to be the spokesperson. And I think that can feel, I think somebody said earlier on, it can feel very tiring. But I suppose what I'm saying is that I get concerned about those people within those senior leaderships who don't have the support, and to trying to affect any change, and how tough that might be as well. But I still recognise that it's important that they are there, policymakers, etc. But I guess I'm not in a particular senior role at present. And when I was in my speech therapy role, I was band 6. So yeah, I'm just kind of reflecting on how that must be a challenge as well. But it's really important that they are there, but that possibly is a very lonely place to be.
I definitely agree, Simon. There's a lot of responsibility on our shoulders to kind of represent our community. I mean, our UK SLT Pride Network is volunteer roles, and I think the same a lot of SLT Time network. And this is something we're doing on top of our work or our study or whatever. So it is a lot of responsibility, and a lot of times these roles, supporting EDI, supporting the LGBT community, people of colour, disability, they aren't paid roles. They're something that you are expected to do for your community, and we do want to do it, but at the same time, it can be a lot of pressure on a small group of people. So I guess that's something we want wider communities to help support each other and help focus on. And kind of in that aspect, how do you think that we can support across different communities? How can people of colour support the LGBT community? How can LGBT people support people of colour? Any thoughts on that?
I think it is important in terms of thinking about maybe how other people of colour can support LGBTQ people of colour. It's important to kind of think about the racist and colonial impact of homophobia within the communities of those of colour. And it's quite a layered thing of like a lot of families, like my family don't really know that I'm out. I don't think they'd even begin to understand pronouns, and I've kind of accepted that and moved on. But that's from years of like, under the guise of religion, that's wrong. Under like colonialism, like it's been wrong to be gay. From Nigeria, where like you can still be killed for being gay. So I think it's important to like approach these subjects with like a lot of sensitivity as well, because a lot of the time this is how people have been socialized to believe that something is wrong, and that it's not, like it's a different way of living, or it's a choice, or I don't know, it's something that's reversible. But I do think, however, there are things, I think it's so important to listen and for people to understand like the different layers of someone's identity. Like for me, I've got like a long list of things that are under my identity. Like I'm neurodiverse, I'm Black, I'm on a gender journey, I'm like queer, I'm like just so much stuff going on that there's not one part of me that is easy to, like there are many ways that I can relate to different groups of people, which I guess is a good thing. But then there's also many ways that I can't fully relate to other people because of all these other things that take up part of my identity. And I think it's important to kind of listen to individuals' stories. Just because you've met one queer person doesn't mean you've met all queer people, if that makes sense. So listening and understanding people's stories, I know that's my favorite thing. I also love to talk and I love to listen. So, and I can think for speech and language therapists especially, we all tend to be talkers and we all tend to be quite good listeners. But yeah, that's my TV.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of assumptions that go on, don't there? People assume that you feel the same way as someone else, or you act the same way as someone else, and that's what I love about our community, is that we are also diverse, and the ways we can relate to each other. And that, because I learn so much every single time I chat to anyone from our committee. Every meeting we have for the Pride Network, I learn so much, and that's something I'm so glad for. What do you think trusts and universities can do more to kind of better educate and empower allies who want to help, or who want to know how to do better?
I graduated last year from uni, and it might be different now, but I think when I was doing my training, anything around diversity and inclusion is more of a tick boxing thing rather than something that's incorporated into the training. So it's like you have a whole module of something, and then at the end they're like, oh, but also remember there is diversity. But but I guess that as a result, people don't always actively think about it. And I think that's something that needs to be done. I don't know, Rick, you might know a bit more because you're still a student. It might have changed. But now working in an NHS trust, I think it's really great that I think it's the same for many other trusts as well, that we have a lot of diversity networks, like, LGBTQ plus network, people of colour networks, and women network, and that sort of thing. but I think is quite limited to like quite exclusively just the people from these communities, but not, although they say, oh, we welcome allies and welcome people from all sorts of background, at the end of the day, it's still just the people from these communities. But so it's not really inclusion if it's just us in the party. So I guess one thing Trust can do, and would be great, is to actually, encourage everyone to be part of these networks, and actually have more conversations with these networks, and just to actually head towards inclusion. One other thing that's quite interesting, I'm going to be part of within my trust, is I'm going to be a reverse mentor. So I'm going to be mentoring someone who is of a higher position, like one of the directors, for example, who is, someone who's from a more privileged background. So, and I'm sure people from higher positions tend to be white people, many men as well. But I think this is a great way, because I think earlier we were talking about sort of policymakers as well. I guess is a good way to, from our end, someone who is from multiple marginalized backgrounds, to influence that change, and so they actually understand what we're feeling, what it's like working as a person like this. And I'm really excited to be starting this program. But I don't know if there's anything similar in your workplace or at the uni even.
That's fantastic, Jen. That sounds like a really, really great kind of scheme there. I hope it goes well, and I can't wait to hear all about it. Really, it sounds fascinating. I know, Simon, maybe you have some thoughts on that topic. Yeah.
Thank you. That sounds really good. I have heard of reverse mentoring before, and I'm not sure if it's something which is done within our trust. But there were just a couple of points that I wanted to pick up on, really. I suppose one of the things, like I said, I qualified in 2011, I think it was 2009, sorry. One of the things which I'm maybe a little bit disappointed to hear, and I think through having students and supporting students as well over the last however long prior to the pandemic, was that maybe that this, I graduated in 2009, but through that discussion and conversation, felt that maybe there wasn't as much change in terms of the courses, in terms of talking about diversity, talking about the communities and the populations that we serve and that we work for, and how to best support those communities, and maybe how to kind of be inquisitive and think about what we maybe don't know, what we need to go and find out. Because I feel passionate that it is not necessarily about asking people to be absolutely knowledgeable, on be a Wikipedia entry on every kind of intersection of, somebody's identity. But I guess it's about knowing where your gaps are, knowing what information, knowing how to sensibly ask information, knowing, who to ask and when not to ask people, and expectations of things like emotional labor and things like that. But I guess, and for me, studying in Birmingham, a very multicultural city, that was like my one criticism of the course that I did. It was that it was, we didn't really talk about anything. I wouldn't dream of having a conversation that I'm having now. I wouldn't have it would not have dreamt of that we would be having these conversations when I was at university, because it was so far removed from that. I think I'm writing a piece at the moment, just kind of a reflection, and I think when I kind of reflected back on university experience, training, etc., heavy on professionalism, but that professionalism was through a particular lens. I believe through a white Eurocentric lens about what is deemed professional within a professional kind of capacity, and how you communicate, how you approach things. And I remember thinking about, or there have been discussions around, multicultural communities and things like that. And as far as we went was talking around bilingualism, and that was it. And there was no there was no kind of discussion about how you as a person and what your identity, what you bring into a room, there was none of that. And it was just, you need to present like this. And yeah, that's something that I kind of had to unlearn as I worked, as I progressed in my career. And I think I learned a lot from my nursing colleagues as well, diverse background, and it just felt different in terms of, I guess, how we were socialized to believe what would be professional within a speech language therapy context. I don't know, I feel like it's really, really narrow, and I think because of that, I have found it difficult in the past to maybe bring different aspects of my identity, because Simon doesn't fit that very narrow view of speech therapy.
Simon, thank you so much for that. And what just struck me, and what I always think about with my training, so I graduated in 2017, did a 4-year bachelor's, is it is grueling how much you have to self-reflect, and 100% that's what we need to do. And it's always on how you impact your clients, fine. And your feedback is often due to, your professional skills, your confidence. But never once did I get asked in 4 years, what biases do you bring? How does your identity impact your client? Do you need support for any of those things? And we really, as a profession, are so self-reflective by the time we end our course. But really, that is through a white lens, and that is not through a lens in which we are thinking about all the intersections of our identities and how that impacts our clients. And unfortunately, it is impacting our clients. I don't know if we want to talk about that, how generally we are kind of supporting our LGBTQ clients, or our clients that are people of colour with disabilities.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I just wanted to quickly just jump in with my perspective, because I know Jen was chatting about kind of perspectives from university, I'm a student at the moment, and I've got to say, some of the education around kind of race and gender, sexuality, and all is pretty bare, pretty shocking. I mean, we had a session, maybe a 3-hour session, where like biases, it was called unconscious bias, right? But there wasn't anything about recognizing your bias, and there wasn't really anything about how to change the way you think, or how to adapt, how to kind of approach that bias and change what you're doing to better serve the communities that you're working with. And I think that was so strange, that it was about being like, this person's this ethnicity, this person's this sexuality, but how does that reflect on you? How is it changing what you're doing in your profession? And there was a little bit about gender and sexuality and race, which was a 4-page document, maybe a couple pages, and that was learning we were supposed to do. But it was just a little like PDF document that we're supposed to read through, which I'm sure most people skipped. Wasn't really required. Wasn't really something that like was any importance was put on. It's very surprising, because I mean, I'm studying in Manchester, and it feels like we work with such diverse communities. There's like 150 languages, I think, spoken in Manchester, and we know Manchester's a very queer city as well. So we definitely would expect to approach working in these communities. So I think learning how to approach your biases and how to reflect and change on that is something that universities need to support students to do more, because it's not an easy thing, and it's something that you have to start somewhere with. But I think there could be a lot more done for it, and definitely for our clients as well. So moving on to that, Kate, you mentioned about kind of what can we do for our clients? What can we do for our clients who are LGBT, people of colour, from one section, from both intersections, from multiple intersections? How do we support across those intersections?
I think like listening is very important, and like educating yourself. I think it sounds like it feels really obvious when you are aware of like the different issues that some groups may have, like if you're living in it, but when you're on the outside of it, you don't really understand. I, for example, work with a lot of the Turkish community where I live, and I like to think, oh, I'm black, so I know everything about every race, and I've experienced everything. And then, like, I come across Turkish patients at times, and I have worked alongside advocacy who provide like interpreters and stuff. And like, we talk a lot about like the Turkish community and like how their approaches to care is like so much different to a British black person, and like that's something that I've not really understood. And like by asking those questions in a sensitive way and like building rapport with people, I think that's so important. I think people forget the importance of doing that, and I think we do live in a world where like you can get cancelled and you can get like told off for asking questions. But I think if you do generally want to find out something, and if you approach things with care and well-meaning thought, I think there is such a huge importance in asking. Like at work, no one, not no one, but I think I changed my pronouns for to they them in my email when like a month after I started, and only now I started back in August. Only now people are like, oh, I've just noticed your, like one person's been like, oh, I noticed your email signature and that your pronouns are in there. I'll try and make an effort. I'm like, that's nice. But like, and then I had another conversation with someone else, and they were just like, oh, I just don't really understand it. And then like, I just don't really understand what that means and like how to use it. And I'm a bit like, oh, well, you could ask, but then you've kind of ruined it for me now because I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to help you, but I'm just going to be a little bit more hesitant because you've just kind of approached it in like, oh, you're making me do one more extra thing. But like, if it is just a general thing of like, oh, what does that mean? And like, how, like, can I best support you? That would be great. So having that, like, just genuinely have it like asking a question, but also taking the time to educate yourself. Google is free, and there is nothing stopping you from Googling something. But obviously, take caution because not everything you read on the internet is true. But just have some common sense as well.
Yeah, I mean,
advice, but
no, I agree. I mean, people have a fear of looking stupid, but I think it's okay to look stupid. I do it all the time, honestly. Like, it's the right to ask a question if you're coming out with care and consideration. What's your thoughts on that, Sam?
Just really to agree with everything that you've both said. I think, yeah, really, really important to listen and to, like you said, to approach it with care and consideration. And I feel like more often than not, when you do that, I think people can see that you're trying. People can see that, you know, the intention can be felt. Yes, you might get it wrong, and I think it's about, you know, just kind of owning that and owning up to, you know, when you do get it wrong, and we will get things wrong. And like I said earlier on, it's not about being a Wikipedia entry for every community and knowing everything about every community. I guess the trouble that, or something that I find difficult is where people kind of feel that they don't need to do that, or they let their assumptions kind of override the facts, you know, override the information which is truly out there. And I remember so this was a good few years ago, and there was a period of time where I was supporting with and leading with on a lot of, well, not leading, I wasn't the decision maker, but doing a lot of work on mental capacity assessments, particularly around forced marriage. And I enjoyed doing that work. It was complex and it was challenging. But, you know, I had to make sure that I found out what I didn't know and made sure, because, you know, I could have done and it was multiple, and it was something that I really raised and highlighted, because you could have easily have done that work in a really poor way if you kind of approached it in terms of, okay, what does a wedding mean for this particular group? And you're completely off the mark, and you're giving the person the wrong information. You're assessing at like the assessment would be completely irrelevant. And I feel like there are times where we can often, as speech language therapists, we can kind of approach it with, you know, we can approach things with the lens, the information that we've all talked about, you know, or most of us talked about, in terms of university and maybe the lack of awareness, lack of cultural competence that people are maybe equipped with from university. We can kind of approach it with that way and get it wrong. But I guess the main thing for me, like you said, Anne, and like others have said, is about asking those questions, listening, and just taking that time to be open to, to getting it wrong, but doing that with care, because I really strongly feel that when you do that, people feel that, and yeah, you might get it wrong, but be open to that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think people from the community know when someone is acting with kindness and coming at a topic with the element of kindness, and when it's done with malice. It's very, very clear. And there's definitely certain parts of our community that do face more discrimination than others as well. Like it's not kind of the same across the whole board. We talk about these different experiences. I just wanted to read some kind of numbers from Stonewall UK. So to start with, half of BAME LGBT people, 51%, face discrimination within the LGBT community. So that's from their own community, and we know that a lot of Black people as well do face a lot of discrimination within the community. That's definitely very well known. More than a third of trans people, 36%, 1 in 8 LGBT disabled people whose activities are limited a lot, so they experience discrimination from within the community. So we know that people of colour who are LGBT, Black people who are LGBT, and people who are trans and non-binary are often the most marginalised within our community. How can we work better to support the most marginalised parts of our community?
I think it goes back to, I think one of the challenges that I've had in the past is maybe before the resurgence of Black Lives Matter is kind of the way I think of things sometimes. It's like that time period, 2020, and before and after. I think I genuinely feel that within healthcare more broadly, maybe within speech language therapy more specifically, maybe it's within the teams that I've worked in, but previously there's kind of been this idea of holistic care, and we need to kind of look at the person holistically. But for me, it's never felt like we've been truly holistic in thinking about how somebody being Black might impact them and their access to a therapy session, or them being trans, or them being disabled, or the intersections of all of those. And I think for a long time we've paid lip service to holistic care, and we've not recognised that those things collectively and singularly impact somebody's access to healthcare and the way that they receive healthcare. So I think it sounds really basic, but I think it's that acknowledgement and that acceptance that those things will impact the way that people access and experience care. And unless we recognise that, then it's going to be really difficult to make those changes. If we're kind of coming at it through a lens of, well, they can get to the appointment, or I can engage with them, they speak the same language as me, and we don't see beyond those kind of real kind of foundation stuff, I think it's going to be really difficult to affect any change. And I think sometimes those things are maybe seen as like the benchmark or the cornerstone of accessibility. Do we need an interpreter, that kind of thing? No, we don't, so that's okay. Like, we'll go on without thinking, actually, are there other things which are going to create barriers to people accessing healthcare? I think, in my experience, I think there's not enough honest conversation about that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, there are extra barriers towards healthcare for more marginalised parts of our community, and there's a lot more we can do, for sure. I think small steps and kind of awareness and a willingness to learn is so key, just for any SLT and any healthcare professional. We're never going to know everything, and we're never going to start off knowing everything. And like we always say in our profession, it's something that you're just constantly learning, you're constantly growing, and that's not just for our professional, it's not just for our kind of speech and language side. It's also just as all-rounded individuals. It's something we have to consistently work at, and it's not easy. So it's something we have to reach for. I wanted to just read some of our experiences from our community before we kind of finish off, just because I think we haven't discussed all parts of intersections, but it's been a really good discussion so far. So one person says they don't feel comfortable talking about how their disability affects their life outside of work, as they're scared that colleagues will feel they're not up to their job, or they think they're lying, as they save all their physical energy for coming to work. Someone says it's still a woefully cis-het white middle class profession, isn't it? That's yeah, and that's something that's changing slowly. And one of the questions we did ask is, would you feel comfortable supporting a staff member, service user, student as a person of colour, and LGBTQIA? 75% of people said they would, and it was slightly lower than the numbers for someone who's just supporting someone who's just LGBTQIA+. So I think that when the intersections come together, there's less confidence going on for some staff and some SLTs. So we've had a really great discussion today. There's been a lot of fantastic points. Thank you so much to all of our participants today. So this has been a discussion between SLTea Time and UK SLT Pride. UK SLT Pride are at UK SLT Pride on Instagram and on Twitter, and I think it's the same for SLTea Time at SLTea Time. Just before we finish off, is there any kind of closing remarks anyone wanted to give, just to end it off, or any thoughts that we didn't get to discuss?
I think I just want to say thanks for this, because it's so nice to I remember when I always phrase it so badly, but like when Black Lives Matter was a thing, I shouldn't say it like that, but basically like June 2020, when people cared about it a lot, and I remember like going on my rant to the RCSLT on Twitter and being like, you should say something about this, and then like a lot of good things have grown from it, but in some ways it stayed the same, I would say, and it is going to be a slow change. It takes 2 years or 3 or 4 years to become an SLT, so hopefully we'll see that change eventually to have a more diverse workforce. But I'm really happy with it fills me with a lot of joy to like hear loads of different voices, and like I kind of always forget about, even though it's part of my identity, kind of like how being like queer kind of comes into like the way I work and the way other people may view. Not that I forget it, but it's not something that's always at the forefront. It's always that I'm Black. So like, yeah, thank you for this conversation, because it is really important for us to think about the different intersections, and hopefully we'll do some more, because this has been fun.
For sure, it's been really nice to chat, and it's something that we're definitely going to try and organise again, hopefully. Yeah, any other thoughts from anyone who wants to jump in? Apart from Happy Pride.
Yeah, Happy Pride. Yeah, I also want to say thank you, especially to you, Rick, as well. I know you're organising a lot of this. It's just so great, all of us, so much, different identities, diversity in the same room, and we're the workforce, we're the speech therapy workforce. It's just really great to be here and sort of promoting that visibility as well, like what SLTea Time is doing, or us, at the Pride Network is doing. And I know there are a lot of these little collectives within our profession, and it's just really great to see lots of these. And like what Anne said, hopefully we will do more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And again, Happy Pride. Let's keep making that kind of positive change, and working towards a better profession for our SLTs. Thank you so much. Again, at UK SLT Pride on our socials, and at SLTea Time. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be sure to follow our Twitter and our Instagram,
SLTea Time,
At SLTea Time.
SLTea Time, to keep up to date with new episode releases.
and that's the SLT for today.